Hello everybody, Elizabeth Schnook here, Director for the Institute for the Study of Man. I'm back again after a long while of doing a lot of traveling to share with you one more in our series of true education versus academic schooling. And where we come from, where we make that distinction, just to remind you, is that with our academic schooling, we've been taught many things that will enable us to attend school and get a job, but not necessarily how to live life. And that's what we call true education. So in these vlogs, we are presenting concepts that will help all of us to assist us in our lives, to live our lives on a daily basis. And in this last of our series, we've been talking about the difference between feelings and emotions. And just to do a recapitulation on what the difference is between the two, is that for us, feelings is what one might call irrational. Those irrational feelings. It's your sixth sense. It's your gut feel. It's something very often you will only get corroboration for afterwards. So you'll have a feeling that something's going to happen and you don't quite know what it is, and you cannot express it in too many ways. And then sometime later on you see, okay, now I know where I had that feeling. Now I know why that actually happened. So that is what we would call a gut feeling. That's what we call true feelings. Emotions, on the other hand, are gifts that have been given to us, and would that we have been taught this as little children already, because once we know what emotions are and how to work with them, life certainly starts to take on a complete and utter different quality to it. We start to tackle all sorts of things that ordinarily we may have run away from. And of course, one thing that we would say is if you actually stay with your emotions instead of suppressing them or trying to run away from them or escape them in some way or another, your emotions will guide you to those true feelings. And after all, that's where we want to get to in our lives, is to finding out what are the true feelings. What is my heart actually telling me here? Because our hearts never lie, whereas our minds are able to trick us more often than not. So let's have a look at our emotions. And we would say that there is only one pure emotion, and that is the emotion of desire. Desire is expressed more often than not in the words of "I want to." And there are four aspects to it. There is the four emotions of the pure emotion. Desire is fear and anger, melancholy and joy. So we would express fear as, for example, it's not I want to run away, it is rather that I want to retreat. I want to take one step back here to see what it is that I need to actually tackle when it comes to my fear, rather than running away from it. And you will see the other vlogs on that one. Then we have the desire for anger. We have anger, which is the desire to fight. And this is what we're going to be talking about this afternoon, today. And melancholy is the desire for change. And this isn't something where you now need to have to go and look for something to change. It's that you've already made a decision to change, or you've already started the process of change, but somewhere along the way you've gone off course. And now melancholy kicks in to show to us, say, somewhere you're not being true to yourself. You decided to do something, and now you're not following through on it, and up comes the melancholy, which is often interpreted or misinterpreted more often than not as depression. I'm not saying there isn't something as depression or clinical depression or any title that you want to give it. But if we would only truly listen to our emotions and work with them, maybe we would never need to get into that depressed state in the first place. And then joy, that is the desire for life. It's the desire to live. And how often in a day do we experience joy and register it and own it and claim it? And I'm really feeling so joyous now. I have this desire for life. Those moments come and go, and we don't acknowledge them, but it's one of the aspects of a pure emotion. Something to really dwell on and to stay with, to just let it all sink in. Whereas the other three emotions we tend to know pretty well. So let's talk about anger today, and to give you the technique to handle anger, a step-by-step process. And what we share here more often than not for the tools to handle life are something that you're doing anyway when you're getting it right. But sometimes we think, well, that was like a bit of a miracle that happened. Not necessarily. You've been through a step-by-step process to get to where you've got to. And it's now to just recapitulate that step-by-step process that you've been through, so that when you're not actually tackling whatever it is you want to in a way you'd like to, you're not getting the results you want. You know how to go back and to retrace your steps and look for the one that you've missed out. So here's the trick with anger. A lot of us have a fear of being angry because we're afraid of being aggressive. Whereas in actual fact, there are some times when there is a need to be aggressive. So if we look at anger being the desire to fight, what are we actually fighting? More often than not, because we haven't been taught this, we'll end up fighting somebody else or something else. And it's therefore becomes something that is outside of ourselves. Whereas in actual fact, when that anger kicks in, it's a gift that is being given to us. It's an indication to us. It's an alert button that says, hey, something needs attention here. You're now needing to not fight the other person. You're now needing to fight for something that you believe in. You need to be fighting for your self-belief. You need to be fighting for clarity. So when the anger kicks in, because we've been taught in some way or another that this is a bad thing and you're not supposed to be angry, we suppress it. But guess what happens? Those people who are suppressing their anger all the time are the ones who become even more aggressive than if they'd actually just been taught how to deal with it in the first place. So suppress your anger at your peril. It's going to come out somewhere and somehow. So let's look at how we are going to work with our anger step by step. The very first step is to acknowledge your anger. It's okay. It's okay. When that anger comes up, acknowledge it. I'm like really angry now. I'm really angry. It's my anger. It's my emotion. Irrespective of what, if it's another person around you is doing. Other people might respond in a different way, but for me, in this instance, I react and I am angry. Now, instead of me fighting with the other person, I need to, first of all, to suppressing it, I need to actually just say, well, I'm really angry now, and it's okay to be angry. The next step we need to take is not unlike with our fear, that we're going to use our fear to propel us forward. When it comes to anger, the way to use our anger is to detach from it. We need to detach from it. We need to take that one step away from it. Doesn't mean to say detaching means you stop being angry. On the contrary, you can be so incensed sometimes that there is no way that you're going to just suddenly stop it. The trick is to detach from it, to look at it, to be with it, to actually experience it and feel it. And we can do this in one of two ways. Let's say, for example, you're in the presence of somebody else and you're having a big argument about something, or you're feeling angry, or whatever it may be with the other person. You think it's the other person. In that instance, you need to actually physically remove yourself, detach yourself physically. If it's somebody with whom you have a relationship, you need to actually make this arrangement with them beforehand to say, look, in our interactions, if I ever get really angry, the way for me to detach from it the best is to actually just exit the room momentarily. Promise, I'm going to come back. There will always be my commitment. I'll be back to continue the conversation or the fight or whatever it may be. But I need to detach from my anger, because that's the only way I can actually bring it back to myself and make it about myself and acknowledge that it's my anger. So instead of me lashing out at you, I want to just go and collect myself, and then I'll come back in and we can continue what it was that we were going through. Now that may be all very well if you're in those sort of circumstances, but there are other circumstances where you might be in with your boss or a client or something like that, and something comes up, you've been given some feedback about the quality of your work or the way that you're behaving, something to that effect, and the anger comes up in you, and now what do you do with it? It's not like you can just get up and walk out in these circumstances. In that case, the way to detach from it, funnily enough, interestingly enough, and has some amazing consequences, is to ask for support. Now, one would think that that's totally counterintuitive, but in that case, if you could actually just say, step number one, I'm really experiencing anger now. Would you mind if we just take a moment and if you can actually support me to work out what it is that I'm actually being angry about? my guess is, in my own experiences when I do this with people, is that it just disarms them completely, because they're used to people getting all angry and defensive and trying to defend their point of view, justify everything. Whereas we don't want to do that now. We want to actually work out, what is this anger? And if I actually stay with this anger, if I stay with this conflict inside myself, and I actually go with it and work with it, it's going to bring me to a place of clarity where I find out what is really going on. And with that, I'm going to get some new knowledge. I'm going to learn something new about myself and the situation or the other person. So step number one, you're going to acknowledge your anger. It's okay to be angry. Then you need to detach from it, either by asking for support or for physically removing yourself from the situation. And then the third step is a vital and a critical step. And this is now, let's say, for example, somebody is angry with you, or they're pointing out something to you, and your anger has come up. And you've asked your question, you've asked for support, you're asking for clarity now. That's what you're fighting for now. Or you're fighting to keep your job, or whatever it is that you're fighting for, as opposed to against. You will now ask your questions, and then once you've asked your questions, I would suggest and recommend very strongly that you now close your mouth, grit your teeth, and listen. Because what you're doing in this instance is you're actually holding up for the other person the mirror of listening. So now, you sitting there listening, you've held up this mirror of listening to them, and now they can go. But of course, by your being silent and truly, truly listening to what they're bringing you, they eventually get to start to listen to the sound of their own voice. And if you've ever experienced that, sometimes you find yourself talking the biggest load of rubbish. And you'll just change the subject, talk about something else, or have a quiet laugh at yourself. Well, something like this can happen as well, is that by holding up that mirror of listening for the other person, they then start to hear what they're saying. And sometimes they will just run out of words to say. That the conversation, the fight will just peter out of them. And then they may just change the subject, and you'll end up talking about something else completely differently, instead of getting yourself embroiled in a pointless argument. One of the other things that can happen, of course, is, let's say, for example, they're still very strong in their convictions of what it is that they're bringing you, and your anger is still there. By having listened to them, having paid them that courtesy and that respect of giving them the space to vent and to express whatever it is that they want to until they've got nothing more to say, it is now your turn to respond. And of course, by having listened very carefully and knowing what you're doing is fighting for clarity, you would have been listening for everything in between the lines, and with that you would have picked up all the ammunition that you may need to respond in kind. And of course, immediately what you're likely to experience is the other person getting defensive and angry and justifying, in which case you say, stop. I paid you the courtesy of giving you that space to talk until you are finished. Now please let me share my bit. So that is one scenario, but there is another scenario where you may be on your own and something happens and the anger comes up, and now it's not another person from whom you're going to be bouncing them off to try and find the clarity. It's something you're going to have to actually stay with yourself, to work with yourself in the same way. So the anger comes up, and it's okay to be angry, and you now know you're actually acknowledging, I'm fighting for clarity or self-respect, whatever I believe in. What is it here? I'm looking for clarity. There's new knowledge beyond this inner conflict I'm experiencing. And in that way, you get to detach from it. And now staying with that anger, it slowly but surely, if not sometimes quite quickly, will actually bring you to a feeling, that gut feeling of what this was really all about. So I'll give you a couple of examples from my own life where I've worked with this technique. It works absolutely brilliantly, and it takes a bit of practice for one to get started, because initially when one starts working with anything, it's difficult to start off with. And so in the early days of working with it, I was still inclined to take somebody's head off, as opposed to learning that the way to work with anger with a skill was eventually to give them a shave, but not to take the head off completely. So it does take a lot of practice, like anything, but we have to start somewhere. So my first example was some years back when I was running teenage camps for the kids coming into puberty. And You may have heard me share this concept before, that if you uplift yourself, you automatically lift all those people around you, uplift them. By the same token, if you let yourself down, you let everybody else down around you too. And in this particular weekend, these few days after school holidays, when I had all these teenagers, there were about 40 of them for a 3-4 day camp, there was one lass, she was probably about 13 years old, very angry, very negative, and very disruptive, and almost to the point of being destructive. And if you don't think that one person can affect 40 people, think again. The impact is there. We just got to always remember that the flip side of the coin also works in the positive sense. Well, in this respect, we were into about day 2, heading for day 3, where I just had enough. There was just so much disruption and destruction going on that for me to be able to continue to keep my focus on another 39 of the children that were there, I was going to have to deal with number 40. And I was at the point where I was going to call her parents, call her mother, and ask her to come and fetch her. Just that, you know, she didn't want to be there and there was no point. It was counterproductive for her and everybody else as well. And so at the end of the session, I let everybody go. We had a beautiful venue up against the mountain looking down across the beach. I sent all the kids down to the beach to have lunch. We'd come down and join them. And I called this young lady to stay behind. And I sat down with her, and I was hugely angry with her. I really was so angry with her because of her defiance and everything that she was presenting in her behavior. You know, my hands were like I wanted to almost throttle her. That's how angry I was. And I realized, my word, you know, this has actually got nothing. My anger, okay, I'm angry, it's fine, but let me actually just see what's really going on here. I might actually be lashing out at somebody, and it's actually my anger. Irrespective of the fact that her behavior is unacceptable, I'm not letting her off the hook. But let me fight for what's really going on with me and why I'm experiencing anger when I'm interacting and dealing with something like this, which doesn't normally get to me. And I sat down with the young lady, and I was about to tell her that I'd had enough of her behavior, and I was going to call her mother to come and fetch her. And I just sat momentarily. I don't think it was even a long time, except it felt quite a long time. I just sat and I looked at her, and just inwardly I was just saying, what is really going on here? Why am I experiencing such anger? And with that, the words that came out of my mouth to her was, why are you in so much pain? And she just took one look at me and she burst into tears, and all that defiance, all the anger, the negativity was absolutely gone. I was quite stunned actually what had happened, and I realized in that moment that as I looked at her, I was looking at myself at the same age. I'd also been very angry and defiant, and my dad had been killed in an accident, and I was growing up without a father, and there was no sort of counseling or guidance at that stage to take us through anything like that, and I was getting angrier and angrier, taken out of my mum, and she banished me to boarding school and all sorts of things. And I looked into this child's face, and that was me I was looking at. And we proceeded to have the most unbelievable talk. And it turned out that this was about the July, September, somewhere around there. Her mum was going to get remarried in December. And she didn't like this man. She didn't have a relationship with him. She didn't like him, and she was terrified of him moving into their home. And this is where all the pain was coming from. But of course, it was being played out in a different way, getting attention in a different way. And by the end of the conversation, where we got to was that I would go with her to talk to her mom and to let her know what was really going on with her before her behavior really became even more destructive. And then I said to her, come on, you know, now we've got this far. Let's have a different experience for the rest of the weekend, and let's go down to the beach and join everybody for lunch. And in the same way that I saw this one negative soul affecting everybody in a destructive way, when she flipped to the other side and somebody had actually heard her and truly listened to her, she just took that group of kids to another level completely. The happiness and the joy that we had for the rest of the weekend, with she being one of the pivotal people to do it, was quite amazing. And then recently I had another example. I was doing a lot of traveling, and I just arrived from the States into Greece, I was at the end of a month end, and I was doing all the financial month ends, and my laptop had crashed somewhere in the middle of the States. And my touristing of that area was in Uber motor cars going from Apple store to Apple store trying to find a quick fix, which didn't work. And so I arrived back in Greece after this very long flight, almost like 25 hours or whatever it was, all in all, and it was 9 o'clock at night, and I was trying to get this computer set up, and I had a deadline for midnight for all these financial month ends, and I was in touch with our IT fellow on another continent, and he was trying to support me and guide me through. And here I am in Greece, and a friend of mine, a colleague from South Africa, sends me a text message to say he needs to talk to me. So my IT fellow, also in South Africa, I get him to call him to say, look, is this a matter of life or death? Because after the second text message, I really, really have to meet this deadline, and I cannot get this computer to work, and can we talk tomorrow? And the friend of mine who was texting me then said to me, look, he couldn't work out whether it was life and death, because he was just realizing what was happening for him there and then. And I said to him, please, I can't talk to you right now. I'm going to call you tomorrow. I'm like, my head's down on the desk, and I'm just about to sleep now, and I've got to get this deadline off. Anyway, I got to bed at some ungodly hour. So by the time I woke up, it was just before lunchtime the next day, and I called him, and I had to leave a message. And then he tried to contact me, and I was somewhere else. And so we started telephone tagging for like almost 2 days. And then he just disappeared. He just disappeared completely for 2 weeks. And I'm now in Greece, he's in South Africa, and I cannot get to him physically. I am trying every which way I possibly can to get hold of him. And by now I'm beginning to feel like one of those people who are left behind when somebody's committed suicide. Somebody reached out to them and they didn't go. Or they sit with that regret, that remorse that they could always have done something if only they'd been given the opportunity, and there's enormous guilt. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I eventually got people back in South Africa to go to his home and to find out where he was, and he'd been ill. He was at his parents' place and he was okay. And so I thought we were now able to have the conversation. And for another week or two, I still couldn't get hold of him to talk to him. Of course, the very first response and the reaction I had was complete and utter relief that he was actually okay. I worked back through all the guilt that I'd gone through, and the whole thing about the fact that I'd made life, I'd made my work, I was busy. I was too busy to speak to a friend who was reaching out in need. Okay, I didn't know it was in need, but it turned out that it was. He wasn't in a good place at all. And now that I knew that he was alive and he was okay and he could talk and everything was all right, and I now needed to speak to him, I couldn't get a hold of him for another 3 weeks. Now I really started to get angry. And then, of course, I didn't have him to work with to find out what the anger was. And this was when I started to just go inside to say, look, this is my anger. Why am I feeling so angry? And it took me back to just tracing it back to get a feeling for what was really going on and what had really upset me so much. It took me back to the time when one of my students had been coming to weekly classes with me when I still lived in Cape Town. And just a few days before Christmas, he'd sat in front of us and told us, how well his life was going and how happy he was with the last 6 months and how far he'd come. And 3 days later, he picked up a gun and he shot himself. And he committed suicide. And the impact on all of us was absolutely immense, and we all had to work through this guilt and this regret that we could have done something differently if only he'd picked up the telephone and not the gun. And here I was in a situation where somebody had picked up a telephone, he hadn't picked up a gun, and I was too busy to speak to him. And that was what dawned on me. And what I learned from that, and I've been acting on it ever since, every time I can actually just bring it to mind, is that when somebody reaches out to me, or somebody wants to talk to me, or somebody wants to connect with me, and I find my inwardly saying, I'm too busy to make the effort, I'm too busy to do it, I'm now dropping everything and visiting that person, connecting with them on the phone, finding out where it is. Do I need to come now? Do I need to deal with it immediately? How can we actually work with this? But making the connection nonetheless. So I hope this has helped you a little bit in how to work better with anger. It does take skill, and it does take a lot of practice. Thank you for listening, and see you again much sooner than the last time. Thank you. Bye-bye.